everyone, and thank you, Chairman John King, President Meeks, Sean McDermott, distinguished guests, veterans, and all the members of the Junior League. We really appreciate your warm and gracious introduction, and for honoring really the Jones and Frost family. Special thanks to the members of the West Point Society of Houston. It is a group that held a very special place in our father's heart, and it's always great to see members of the class of 58, 85, and 88. For me and my brother, this is surreal. We just both recently retired, my brother a year ago, and I just took off the uniform in August. And so we're still adjusting to the business suit attire, the growing your hair out. Him not so much, but for me it's good fun. And as we approach Veterans Day, this one marks the 100th anniversary of ending of the war to end all wars. And John asked us to share a few thoughts and perspectives of our father's Army and our Army that my brother and I spent over 30 years in. And first we thought it would be easy because the Army really hasn't changed a lot since 1958 till today. And in many ways it has, in terms of technology, doctrine, several uniform changes. So for those of you in the room, we started with the banana PT shorts, went to gray shorts, went to black shorts, 5 combat uniforms that we wore in garrison, 8 if you count the ones that we wore downrange, 2 dress uniforms. But in the end, our armies overlapped, and ultimately our successes in Desert Storm till today have been built on a leadership foundation of all the generations that have served before us, irrespective of the service uniform that you wear. So what my brother and I will try to do in the next 20 minutes is highlight some of the changes, some which are cyclic, and as well as those that have stayed the same, and then hopefully leave some time to have some questions. Our father, we can go to the next slide, Lincoln Jones III, finally, and I say finally, entered West Point in 1954 after 3 previous failed attempts to seek admission. Okay, sorry, Dad. I'm kind of giving some inside history here. It was noted that he was probably the only plebe going through alcohol detox after several uniform reissues during what they called Beast Barracks, because he spent 2 years at Lehigh University, not really cracking the books, but on frat row. But West Point was always in his blood, not only because of his dad and uncle, who had graduated in the 1920s, but because he had an intense desire to serve our nation, and a personal passion to serve our Army, especially as an infantryman. For our dad, there was only one color that mattered, and that was infantry blue. As he entered West Point, the active Army was still coming off the personnel growth that supported the Korean War previously discussed of 1.4 million men, and I say men because the women serving were just a small portion of that force. He would graduate as a lieutenant of infantry, marry his cadet girl, Anne, our mother, and headed to Fort Benning. He told our grandmother that he wouldn't take Anne very far from New Jersey, but the first duty assignment landed them in Hawaii, followed by Italy, not too bad for a young infantryman. And then during this time, our Army had shrunk to 900,000. It was an Army attempting to justify itself in a growing age of nuclear weapons and the growth of air power. A cycle and an argument that has continued since the end of World War II to this very day. But this was also the age of the basics. Whether it be basic rifle marksmanship, from the M1 Garand to the M14 to ultimately the M16 and the M4 we use today, the skills of shoot, move, and communicate, and the fourth skill that we introduced in the last 20 years of treat, were and still are the heart of being a soldier. Back then, communications was absolutely simpler. Operations orders were either handwritten, or if you were at higher headquarters, they were typed, and they were very short and to the point. They were able to be transmitted and copied, usually by a mimeograph machine. Orders were also given face-to-face or over the radio, and there was a true art to verbal communications. Map overlays, the ones that we knew, were not screenshots from PowerPoint, They were on onion paper or plastic, and every officer had their bundle of favorite markers. Truly a lost art in the age of computers. Next slide.
Next slide, please, George. After returning to Fort Benning for the Captain's Career Course and then serving in Korea as a company commander, my father, like most of his contemporaries, shifted his focus to the growing war in Vietnam. He would watch a conscript army almost double in size from 850,000 to almost 1.6 million active soldiers at the height of the Vietnam War in 1968. A war that would ultimately claim over 58,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, and Coast Guardsmen. While the M16, which is the basis of our modern M4 carbine, replaced the M14 during the war, it truly was the helicopter that transformed maneuver as the Army wrestled with fighting not only the North Vietnamese regulars, but an ever-present counterinsurgency fight, the lessons of which we would lose but have to regain 30 years later in the streets of Baghdad and in the provinces of Afghanistan. Communications was also transformed, especially the communications home. Now, unlike World War II in Korea, it was not just letters, but tape recordings. We listened to our father talk to us on the reel-to-reel tape decks, telling us good night so we could talk to our mom. Today, however, we have almost constant communications, whether it be Skype or email, an aspect that I'm sure many of these active officers and non-commissioned officers and even soldiers will tell you has its positives and has its negatives. We also began to realize the power of the media, especially back then television, as our parents shooed us away from even the nightly news with Walter Cronkite. Today, in an ever-complex and changing environment, the instant access to opinions and knowledge through the internet caused its own problem set, both operationally and personally. Vietnam also was a war built on individual perspectives, based on where you served. One's experience in the Highlands in 1965 was different than one's experiences in the Delta in 1968 or 1970. This phenomenon, however, was not unique to Vietnam, but also was the case now as we enter the 17th year. I say it again, the 17th year of our now longest war in Afghanistan. As in Iraq, your perspective was based on when and where you served, whether it was in the streets of Iraq or the provinces of Afghanistan, whether it was the initial entry into Baghdad or the surge in the highlands of Patika province. That was your perspective in terms of time and event. Next slide, please. As the Joneses turned the corner, and as you can see, my sister's hairstyle had not changed yet. We still were in pigtails. It's my mom's fault, she says. We would leave Fort McNair in Washington, D.C. after service in the Pentagon, where my dad was the aide to the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, and head to beautiful Fort Carson, Colorado, where my father and mother would face the challenges of command in a changing Army. As the force structure cycle repeated itself, the Army would lose again half its active strength, from 1.3 million to 750,000. Many soldiers, officers, non-commissioned officers who wanted to stay were given their pink slips. The draft, too, ended in 1973 and would lead to a new volunteer Army, manned, unfortunately, by a depleted NCO Corps that had seen repeat deployments to Vietnam, and a force itself struggling not only with drugs, but also racial tensions. But with great leaders such as General Creighton Abrams, whose also youngest son, Abe Abrams, is now also a general officer, in fact, en route to Korea, helped mold the character of the class of '85, just like General Abrams molded those officers that stayed to transform the Army and to rebuild. Leaders like Don Starry and Trevor Dupuis studied the Arab-Israeli War of 1973 and realized that the Army could not defeat the Warsaw Pact. There was not a renaissance in leadership, doctrine, training, and importantly, equipping the force. We would go beyond just a helicopter, but we would look at what we would now and still call the Big Five. The M1 Abrams tank, the Bradley fighting vehicle, the attack helicopter AH-64, utility helicopter UH-60 Blackhawk, and the Patriot air defense system. All the tools that we would need, not only in the plains of Central Europe to face the Soviet war, but ultimately they would be the instruments of our success later for the last 35 years. And I say again, those weapon systems are still in effect, almost 40 years since their inception in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. The 70s also ushered in a greater inclusion of women, as 119 female cadets entered West Point in July 1976 as part of the class of 1980. Next slide.
The 80s and 90s, okay, now really don't make fun of the hair. For those of you that know that time period. They were the golden years for the Jones family, time when all three of us would serve together until my dad retired in 1991. We would serve in the United States, Korea, but predominantly in Europe as part of the 250,000 of America's 780,000 soldiers that stood guard on what was called the Freedom's Frontier. It was tough being a daughter of a two-star. If you look at that picture, second from the right, that was my dad flying into Hohenfeld's training center to check out my platoon position. So for those active in the room and retired know that's really not the best thing. We have to tell your battalion commander that some two-star has just landed on your platoon position to ensure that the fighting position was set up correctly. And then, so it was just, I think my brother had it worse. So he ended up having to actually serve in the company that my father commanded. So he went mechanized, I went light. So if you can think of the dinner room table discussion, I went airborne, light division, he went mechanized. I always said the airborne was the smarter, faster force. There's a huge debate about that of what was said at the dinner table. But so you can think about our conversations about where the Army was going, how we were going to maneuver into the future. And we had come a long way. We had moved from trench warfare in World War I, invention of the first armored vehicle, to maneuver warfare in World War II, introducing our airline battle doctrine, and then in the 80s and 90s, that would help allow us to fight outnumbered and win with the newly fielded Abrams tank and the rest of the Big Five. Like a football team, go Army. You need me? It's going to be a good year. Go Army. We were prepared because our training foundation that we had allowed us to fight numerous pre-deployment battles already in the deserts of California, the swamplands of Louisiana, and the mud of Hohenfels. This became the heart of our training centers, a practice that continues today, but in many ways is even tougher as we try to replicate the intricacies of the urban terrain and also the cultural aspects that our soldiers were dealing with in this shrinking world. We also faced the challenges of another drawdown as we sought to claim a peace dividend at the end of Desert Shield and Storm, with 8 divisions deactivating, and many of our cohort and classmates were leaving the service to lead our nation in a different way, either as businessmen and women, teachers, and many became future politicians. After the fall of the Berlin Wall and Desert Shield and Desert Storm, those of us faced a new challenge, and it was called the Zero Defect Army Environment. And this was all the while we were continuing to answering our nation's call, whether it was in the streets of Mogadishu or in the mud of the Balkans. Next slide. Like many of us, 9/11 changed everything, not only for the Army, but all the services, for all the services and our families. A new demand cycle emerged, an Army now of only 480,000. Our life became train, deploy, recover, reset, train, and deploy again. At first, the deployments were 6 months, 9 months, then 12 months, and then extended to 15 months during the height of the Iraq surge. The volunteer Army and sister services did not buckle, but we excelled, even as more and more stress was put on our military force and in particular our non-commissioned officer corps. Unlike Vietnam, we were bolstered by the fact that we were formed, trained, and deployed as a team. We were also supported by strong communities like the ones here in Houston that both inside and outside our garrison locations did an outstanding job supporting our families. And there's many of you in the room that supported our multiple deployments. I see the sons that in Iraq and Afghanistan, the care packages, I can't thank you enough. They were just so well received and really helped those days be a lot easier. But we would face some old and new threats, like improvised explosive devices, which actually had been seen in Vietnam, that unfortunately would rip open our vehicles, kill and wound our soldiers. But it would be another new threat that would emerge that I want to just spend a minute to talk about from a new domain, which is our newest 5th domain for the military, and that would be cyber that would cripple us in a way that I don't think many of you know about. Just like society, the military had and is on its own very fast pace of digitization. And it is my personal opinion, I say personal, so please don't let this be in the Houston Chronicle, that I believe we are actually a nation at war again, and we are naive to what is happening here on American soil. Because in the cyber domain, they have actually already crossed the line of departure. Our adversaries are here on our soil, and we have absorbed, because we have legacy military weapon systems that open up some incredible vulnerabilities that we don't know yet what could cripple us in future conflicts. But I want to illustrate something that happened to us in 2008. And it's called, and I'll say it in 3 words and raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. It's called Operation Buckshot Yankee. Does anyone know what Operation Buckshot Yankee was? Raise your hand. 1 person. I didn't anticipate that, but this was absolutely the Department of Defense Operation codename to respond to our cyber awakening of October 2008. And I just want to explain to you a little bit about where we were. We were at war in Iraq and Afghanistan while we were also doing simultaneously counterinsurgency operations in the Philippines. In Iraq, we were what we called the surge. We had dramatically increased the number of personnel in theater. We had extended our deployments to 15 months due to the fact that we were being hit by more IEDs, and the changes in insurgency operations was making us go back and rethink how we were going to fight. Everyone was on a heightened footing, and our casualty rates were escalating. My husband was deployed as a battalion commander on the Syrian border. Peter was actually, my brother was serving in Baghdad at the time, and I was a battalion commander in charge of one of the largest contingency operating bases in northern Iraq called Tikrit, home for over 20,000 military contractors and civilians, and also most notably the hometown of Saddam Hussein. So we weren't very well-liked as we exited the gate of the base. I had approximately 1,200 men and women under my direct command whose primary responsibility was to operate the command control headquarters of the Northern Iraq Military Operations Command, commanded by a 2-star, and we were the central hub of intelligence information. We had the added responsibility to keep what I would equate to here, Interstate 45, cleared of improvised explosive devices, because that was our clear logistics route to run supplies north and south. But it was a highway littered of IEDs, and these tasks required hourly coordination and collaboration shared with our coalition and allied partners who didn't reside on the same, you could say, internet network, communications network. So the ability to share information and intelligence to include large amounts of imagery was of utmost importance during this time frame. We relied heavily on one small device, the USB. This was the center of gravity for us. And if anyone was down there downrange at that time and you were actually one responsible for making sure intelligence information was passed, this crippled us. And what happened was we relied on this to pass all our data between our partners, not only on base, in between networks. My brother sitting in Baghdad, just between the embassy and the multinational force headquarters, they would hand carry the USB to get the timely information passed. But it was a way we were able to just do this outside at our most remote operating bases as well. So you can imagine shock and disruption when you walk into your operations center in the morning and receive the no notice notification to not only stop use, but to confiscate, and all these had to be turned in for forensics with really no reason at that point in time. And you seem like that would be a really insignificant thing. It became a major command and control issue for every command. And what we would quickly learn is that malicious code had been placed on a drive by a foreign intelligence agency and had already been uploaded on the network run by U.S. Central Command. And that's the command responsible for not only military operations, but also security and stability activities in West Asia, parts of North Africa, Central Asia, and then most notably Afghanistan and Iraq. The code had already spread undetected on both classified and unclassified systems, and it established what we call a digital beachhead from which data could be transferred to servers under foreign control. We soon realized overnight, for those of us in the intel business, that our lives had changed. Our digital military and complex technological warfighting platforms that give us tremendous advantage over the enemy could now be used against us. This is what caused, when people think about what caused Department of Defense to create a cyber command, for the Army to actually set up a maneuver branch akin to infantry and armor, is why we stood up the cyber warfare branch, is because we recognize we have to maneuver against an enemy that you actually can't see. It's not something physically tangible that you can see. So with this, we now have cyber upon us as we've entered 2008 and beyond.
The pace of change we have felt even now is accelerating. For those of you who are just young and new in uniforms, for those that have us now trying to figure out how to put on a suit after 32 years of being told what to wear, it is going to grow exponentially. But this cycle still continues. After 2010 and we left Iraq, our force structure again decreased with the loss of almost 100,000 soldiers since our height of our force structure in the Army Reserve. The base realignment and closure commission affected all the services, bases being closed, functions being consolidated, and for my sister maneuver branch, the Armor, lost their home at Fort Knox and moved to Fort Benning, and we're now called the Maneuver Center of Excellence. Women have also made great strides. They can now serve in all specialties to include infantry and armor, and it is with pride as the infantry commandant that I witnessed the first 3 women, all West Point graduates, are in the Ranger tab. The Army is also looking at finally instituting a new combat fitness test. So no longer are we just doing push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run. We're following our Marine brethren and doing something that is focused on combat and what we have to do to be functionally fit. And even the uniform. So there, I'm not shedding a tear because I couldn't afford to go back to possibly the era of the pinks and greens from World War II in Korea. So what is old is now new again. But most importantly, after 17 years of fighting and counterinsurgency, just like the end of Vietnam, our leaders at the Department of Defense realized that our adversaries, and I will use them and call them our adversaries, especially Russia and China, took book on us. And as we continue to fight a counterinsurgency, they themselves modernized for peer competition. A competition that now requires a new set of tools, like the post-Vietnam era Big Five, that will enable all the services to fight in the 5 domains of air, sea, land, space, and cyber. So we're going to try this here. Charlie, we're just going to go to the next slide, and then I'll tell you when to click. In my current job, though, I think I have probably the best job in the world. Because as the president of our National Infantry Museum, I have an interesting perspective. I get to live with historians, but I also get to see probably the one thing that is the true constant that we have no matter what happens. And that is the willingness of our young men and women to stand up and serve. It truly is their spirit and their valor. Some of them who don't even remember what 9/11 was. We're getting to that point now. So I'd just like to show you a quick clip so that you realize that the spirit and heritage of the American service member is still very strong today.
Your visit to the National Infantry Museum will begin with a 240-year journey along the last 100 yards ramp, an exhibit that reflects the fact that it is the foot soldier, armed with rifles and bayonets, who owns the last 100 yards of the fight. Along this trail are vignettes of historic battles that you will again encounter on graduation day. From Alexander Hamilton's assault of Redoubt No. 10 in the Revolutionary War, to the battle-damaged Bradley fighting vehicle, standing testament to the sacrifices our armed forces still make today. You will become steeped in America's story, past and present. Admission to the museum is free, but we do ask for a small donation at the door to help maintain this world-class facility. There is plenty to see outside as well. A restored World War II Company Street will take you back to Fort Benning in the 1940s. Connecting the museum with the parade field is Heritage Walk, where on your left you'll pass a 3/4 scale replica of the Vietnam Wall, and on your right a memorial to the global war on terrorism. Along this path you may find yourself reflecting on the sacrifices of an earlier generation on one side of Heritage Walk, and a current generation still very much in the fight on the other. Finally, you'll reach NOA Field, where your sons or daughters' long weeks of training will be rewarded. Soak in the significance as they march across sacred soil gathered from the same infantry battlefields you discovered on the last 100 yards ramp, providing these newly minted soldiers a tangible connection to the brotherhood they have just joined. After the ceremony, you'll have a few more minutes to celebrate before the next adventure. Take this time to focus on your soldiers' remarkable accomplishments and the overwhelming pride you'll feel for a loved one who has just made the most noble commitment to thwart any enemy that threatens what we cherish most, our freedom.
So on behalf of my brother and I, we are really honored and humbled to be with all of you today. And I will tell you that our thanks and what has instilled in us this sense of service, I need to take a minute to thank our mom, because she truly, she and our father, just the way they raised us, and to always think about giving, and to be around all of you who also have that sense of service and wanting to support, whether you are the one that is worn in uniform or you're here because you're supporting someone who has worn the uniform or serves as a civilian or contractor to our Department of Defense. Thank all of you. It has truly been our honor. We are soldiers for life, and we will now find another way to continue to support our young men and women regardless of what uniform they wear. And we look forward to spending more time in Houston now that we're not being sent to all the different edges of the globe and deployed, but we look forward to getting to know all of you in the future years ahead. So thank you for allowing us to spend today with you.
Great way to get involved in Houston is to join the Rotary Club of Houston.
And as a Columbus member, I want to get your signature that I get credit.
We'll figure something out. So we've got a couple of minutes for questions and answers. If anyone has a question for the generals.
I have a question on the cyber. Some time ago, I saw some story that our missile bases are run off of floppy disks in order to protect from cyber attacks. Is that a fact or true?
So all of the critical Department of Defense infrastructure has been hardened and secured. There is a priority list, and it is being, by service, it's being worked. The services all own certain portions of the critical infrastructure. I will tell you that is not where we are today. Were we there at one point in time? Absolutely. Just remember, we did not know this adversary. We did not look at this as an adversary in this space. we took on technology at a speed just like everyone has done in the business world without thinking through the industrial, I say the operational technology, Internet of Things. Think about it. Anyone watch that 60 Minutes of the Jeep Wrangler that was hacked and they took control of the Jeep? That's the same bus system that sits in our weapon systems. So there's been a lot of work that we've had to go back and review because we never thought of having a peer adversary in this space. So in some areas, we're just going to have to assume the risk because you would break that system. And in others, as we build the future weapon systems, they are going through an acquisition process that requires cybersecurity. I like to use a Navy term, that will be built from the whole up. So you cannot build a future weapon system that doesn't bring these cybersecurity aspects in from the very beginning.
When the United States sells military equipment to other countries, how much protection is built into that?
So that's a great question. He's asking about when we sell equipment to another foreign country. It depends on the foreign country, and that is a different acquisition requirements process of what would be considered a black box technology that is shared or not shared with that country. So it goes through a completely different acquisition process of what is sold. I will tell you now that cyber is now a major threat. How that process is being executed is being re-looked today. Because you gotta remember, this gives an advantage on both sides. Because you can do reverse technology and understand how our weapon systems work. So this is causing everyone to rethink how we do business. And we say that on the military side, for all my industry partners in the room, you should be thinking about that from your enterprise systems, from your industrial internet systems as well, because we are bringing together the industrial Internet of Things without thinking through what I call the soft underbelly, our utilities, our transportation systems, our telecommunication systems, of where would the adversary hit. I truly don't believe the adversary wants to go head to head with our military as far as our heavy combat power. I believe, not to scare anyone today, I think they're going to hit our cities. That's our soft underbelly. We do not have a resilient country. Our country cannot go without electrical power. Our cities that have over 1 million people in them are not that resilient, unfortunately. So I think there needs to be a call to action, not just what we're doing in DoD. I think DoD is now ahead of where we need to be in the public and private sector.
Thank you. A question. What do you think about the 5,000 or more troops that are now going to be sent to our border?
Well, I think thank you, my sister's making sure I'm answering the politically correct answer, which is, but it's also the true answer. You know, our soldiers, at the last 100 yards in our museum, we have the image of our soldiers walking up the huge hill at Malone Range. And they're walking into, we don't know where. But our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardmen, they go wherever our Commander-in-Chief or our National Command Authority tells us to go. Because our oath is exactly that, to the Constitution, not to an individual person. We're supposed to obey the orders of those who put it over us. But we have an elected system that says Commander-in-Chief, and also the Secretary of Defense is the other half of that National Command Authority. And when they decide the deployment order, we salute the flag and we go. So what mission they're going to get, unlike you, I've read the papers, it'll be interesting. There's huge capabilities. And I think we're going to try to figure out what truly is going to be the requirements once they happen.
Hi, thank you for such a great presentation. On the cyber side, are you finding that the brain drain, I guess, maybe to Silicon Valley, is that having an effect on the type of quality people you get helping to fight this battle, or are you using the companies out there to help with it?
So we haven't seen it yet because we've just been in really the first 8 years of building the force and building the cyber mission force. I think if it's in your DNA that you have the sense to serve, you're going to serve. And we have enough young men and women who actually have an interest in this field to want to serve wearing the uniform, or do it in civilian clothes, because within the Cyber Mission Force, 80% of the team is military and 20% is actually civilian. So getting that group to come together and then recruit where we can actually find the talent. So that's probably the biggest problem right now, is where our military, I don't care which service you are, you're not necessarily found in the cities that are actually growing that generation that can bring that skill set. So we're actually, from an Army perspective, and I think the Air Force, I can speak a little bit to what they're doing, because I know what they're doing here in Texas, reaching out to those local universities. We're doing that because the Army Command, when we stood up in Georgia, looking at the Southern Belt, because it's true, if you grew up in the South, you don't necessarily want to move to the Northeast. So how do we look at the Southern Belt and what is being taught in the universities, to look at those to understand what type of curriculum we need those students to be taking. We're looking at how the other three-letter agencies go into high schools and look at high school interns, so they can start to get their security clearance early on in their at an early age, and then can carry that through as an intern in college. That's been actually a very successful program for the other three-letter agencies. So again, if you don't have that sense of service, I don't know that we would recruit you anyway. Because it's not anyone wearing a uniform. It's not for the paycheck. I don't care what branch or what your military occupational specialty is. It's not for the pay. It's literally being a team of teams, that duty, honor, country, that makes you want to stay for 30 years plus. So I think it's finding those individuals.
I want to thank you all for being here, and certainly you exhibit what we at Rotary say, service above self. You really do this, and you put everything on the line. What I wanted to ask you about was, I understand that you have quite a collaborative situation with Israel, and a lot of your technology comes in sharing, and I wondered if you'd been there with them, and what, if you can speak about that collaboration and that sharing that you have done with Israel, one of our greatest of allies.
Well, as I mentioned in our comments, really one of the collaborations started to occur before the '73 war, but after that we realized how critical it was. Because just as the Ukraine is for now to watch what the Russians are doing, really what happened in the '73 war, where you basically had the Arab nations equipped with Soviet equipment, Israel equipped with American, was a test bed. We were able to see what potentially future war was going to be like. I will tell you that relationship since '73 continues to this day. As the infantry commandant, I was in regular email and visited my Israeli infantry commandant every year. I would go there, or he would come here to Fort Benning, and we would travel around. So that, it's not just the technology that we're thinking of, but it was also the tactics, techniques, and procedures. They are experts in subterranean, which is an area which we have not been able to see for a while. It's an area that we know are important to issues on the Korean Peninsula. And there's also a factor that we had to face when we went and helped the Iraqis go in to retake Mosul from ISIS. So it's both technology and also tactics and techniques. So it's a partnership that will continue to blossom for years to come.
Good morning, ma'am and sir. With the speed of change and the advances in technology, how is the U.S. government prepared to change its acquisition process to not only have an ability to have a more fluid ability to assess? I have a friend of mine who has a patch on his shoulder that used to say, "It's not your daddy's helo, ... Well, it might be."
It is.
So there's a very slow process in acquiring the new technology, but by the time we acquire it, it's already obsolete.
Yeah, so it's and I can throw it over, pass it to my brother. So the Army's on this road with its new Army Futures Command that will actually be stood up here in San Antonio, which is great for the state of Texas. And we've been looking at this. I spent my last 5 years in the Pentagon, and it was the biggest frustration. We have other transaction authorities that, at least for cyber and intelligence, we're going to use that to actually procure and get through the acquisition process more quickly. It is a top of a conversation in every Pentagon meeting. We recognize, the leadership recognizes that the acquisition process has to change. I think in the industry meetings that I was a part of prior to leaving the service, where we ran into a friction point with our industry partners was when we told them that we weren't going to buy a piece of equipment to outfit the entire Army anymore. We are going to buy a set of equipment for a certain function or for X number of divisions, not all the divisions. And some of our big industry partners did not like that answer. And they wanted it to be all or nothing. And you can't modernize and stay on top of technology if you're buying it for all 500,000 when you know you may only need it for X number of, or a certain type of divisions. That's going from our tactical communications network all the way up to our big weapon systems. So that's a major change, at least that I can speak of for the U.S. Army. But the entire acquisition process, which is a huge elephant in the room, needs to change. It was one of my comments that if we change the Army process, that's great, until that requirement hits the Joint Staff. And if the Joint Staff process hasn't changed, then you're just stuck in the mud again, because everything you thought you were going to then move quickly through, they're going to ask you for that, all that evidence that's required anytime you go after an acquisition program to be brought forward. So it is a problem. I don't know if you want to.
And to add, I think there was a sort of a confluence of forces here. One was, again, watching what Russia has done to modernize and watch what's happening with China, because they do have talk about a partnership, they have a technological transfer agreement between them as well as India. So no matter who you sell to, that technology is going to make its way no matter what you're going to do in terms of sanctions. But the other part is, we realize, as my sister said, you can't outfit everybody with everything. So as an infantryman underneath Secretary Mattis, we realized that we were fighting with the same rifle, basically, that my father had in Vietnam. It's the M16, now the M4 carbine. So the technology is out there for us to change the fire control system, to change the ballistics, to change the bullet, to change the chamber. All that is there to make it lighter. And so one of what we're calling cross-functional changes on soldier lethality. So with the Marine Corps, we're going to look at a next generation squad weapon. We're going to look at a new carbine. We're going to look at a mobile protective firepower. We're going to look at a new tank, new artillery. And we're going to take really what we're asking. We learned our lesson. We're not going to read sci-fi books that go to industry and say wouldn't be nice to have. Even though in cyber, if you read Ghost Fleet, that's a scary book. So on the first question, if you haven't read that, it shows you where our vulnerabilities are in a fictional standpoint. But we're asking industry to show us what you have. And that's why we moved here to Texas, because of what's happened in San Antonio and Austin. And we're going to try to just take that stuff off the shelf. And with leadership right now, we're going to try to plow through that. I'll tell you, the biggest problem is not the desire to modernize, and it's almost not the regulations. Having sat with the Secretary of the Army, not having a stable budget that you can forecast and be able to put S&T, R&T dollars, and then a procurement line to, kills industry and causes a lack of innovation. So, we just did probably the highest plus-up that we'll probably get out of this administration. So you had a lot of industry partners start jumping, and guess what they're doing right now? As of this last week, or last Tuesday, they're going to ground to try to figure out what's next. Because you're more savvy in the industry department, you need a projected out of income that will allow you to project out how you're going to be able to provide that product to the customer.
Thank both of you for your service to the Republic. There are some of us in cyber that are very concerned about what the Chinese are doing. For instance, over in Georgetown, the $200 billion that were put in, and such a significant amount of the grad students that came in that did not have a background check done to see what their military ties were. Are we looking at the military getting more involved because we're not only do we have a brain drain, but we have such a problem with so much of our technology is being stolen and moved out, and we sit around and say it's not happening. And it concerns a lot of us, especially in your fields. Do you think that the military is going to get more involved in doing the vetting?
So I wouldn't say the military is going to get more involved. I think it's a two-part answer. So all of that falls under Department of Homeland Security, and when asked and called for, they'll come to DoD and ask for assistance. They've done that in the past of other major breaches and intrusions. The problem is, if you go to the point when we're a nation at war, the Department of Defense cyber mission forces are then already allocated. They're already employed working against those critical infrastructures. My concern is now, especially in academic institutions and other research labs, where are we putting in the standards and the regulation of how we're securing that intellectual property? When does that piece of research actually hit what is the lawyers would tell you breaches an IP, trademark, copyright, because that is what is being siphoned off. And I've been working with academic institutions at the Big Ten level, and you get a lot of pushback about academic freedom. Well, I say you can be open and secure at the same time. You shouldn't be just wide open, that you can sit there and look at laws and see exfiltration of data at amounts that should not be occurring. When are we as a nation, when are our academic institutions as a body going to say, we need to have more regulation or and I hate to say the word regulation because people always go, ugh, but standards to say that is unacceptable for our country. But that's where I'm saying this call to action needs to happen, not just from the Department of Defense side. They're only going to be able to build so much based on the budget, and they're pretty much at their capacity right now. But you're going to need to look within your cities and your industries. What is your cyber incident response team that you're building? City of Houston? I mean, you can call on the National Guard because they will have cyber protection teams, but there are other companies here that will call to that action as well. I think there's things that we're going to have to look at within the transportation industry. We've got to wake up of what's happening, and then we've got to put in the security in place. I'm not saying lock everything down. I actually, technology gives us a way to be open and secure, but we have to recognize what's happening and have that threshold. We do watch the Chinese very carefully. But at what point, you've just crossed that line between what's public and private and what falls under that federal government jurisdiction. And that's black and white line right there, what they can do.
How has basic training changed in light of the fact that it's a volunteer army? Also, have you dumbed it down or made it easier?
Well, we definitely haven't dumbed it down because technology has caused us to actually try to figure out a different way. I'm probably going to pose this maybe in a different, and my sister will shock you a little bit on the cyber. I'm now going to shock you about what is probably, I would consider as an infantryman, a real national crisis. What percentage of the population between 19 and 25 do you think is even eligible to serve in our nation's armed forces right now?
20%. 2%.
17.
10.
We're not that low. We are at 30%. Now wait a minute. Think about it. 30% of all 19 to 25 are eligible. That's not 30% want to come, because those are your kids who are going to school. Those are the kids that you want as your workforce. Those are the kids that we want in the Army. The Army missed its recruiting goal last year by 7,000. We were not able to fill our seats. That led class unconducted at Fort Benning and all of our basic training classes at Fort Jackson. Because it's a competitive market. The volunteer Army works. We don't have to dumb it down. We do have to sometimes provide incentives. But I will tell you, when you're all competing for that small piece of pie, it gets very, very hard. And so now I'll ask the question, what do you think the number one disqualifier is for kids between 19 and 25? Weight. Overweight. That leads to adult diabetes, which makes you non-deployable and therefore cannot join the military. The second one is not drugs, it's medication. Well, unfortunately, it's the medication that we, as parents, and as one who is guilty, go to the doctor and say, my son is having a problem. I believe he has attention deficit disorder. Okay, well, here's the pill. That pill makes him no longer eligible for military service for at least a year until he can be fully cleaned, and then has to go for a waiver. So it's not just, the old thing of, okay, if you get arrested, you got to get a waiver, or hey, did you ever smoke pot? When you're a teenager, and don't tell anybody. But our real crisis is one of overweight, and that leaves, I guess, a question to your standards. We don't change the standards as it relates to basic training. What we have learned, though, is guess what? Basic training is now going from 14 weeks to 22 weeks. Because we're finding that we have to allow, and this is for infantry and armor, the OSINTs, and then we'll go to basic training, is because our kids are showing up having not drank milk, therefore have limited bone density, have had a poor diet, and when you put them under load, and all my infantrymen will know that they break and they get femoral cracks, which is $1 million to the taxpayer. So imagine I'm sitting as a commandant of infantry, and you as a parent have given me your most precious resource, your son and daughter, and I have to go back to you at week 5 or 6 and ship them home while they're on crutches or in a wheelchair because their bodies were not strong enough to take it. So we now have to take a much more structured role to the fact that we even go to a 4th meal a day, which is insert additional calcium into their systems to help build up their bodies. So we have not just a cyber awakening, but we also have an issue with our youth in terms of how we're going to provide grit for our future armed forces. Sir.
Yes, I want to correct an error in the presentation. As one who fought in the Forgotten Victory, I want to point out that the Korean War is still going on. There is no peace treaty, and until one is signed, we are still the longest war in our country's history.
Having served as a platoon leader at Panmunjom, I stand truly corrected. I will give back my JSA tab.
So I have a rifle in my closet from a company called Tracking Point. And it cost $7,000, which is kind of a lot for a rifle, but it allowed me to make an 800-yard shot in a 20-mile-an-hour crosswind on a 4-inch target. There are probably snipers in the room who are better than me, but I made that shot. That is commercially available today. Why isn't that something we're acquiring in volume to drive the cost down for our service forces?
And I'll tell you, as we look at the next generation rifle, my sister sort of hit it right up front. The Army now, we're all boutique customers, right? You have different apps on your phone, you go buy at certain places, but the Army is still an industrial army. We buy in mass. So we're looking to buy a new carbine for well over 570,000 soldiers. You're not going to be able to buy or even get, in terms of volume, be able to get that $7,000 down. So what we're looking at now is we're going to outfit our tip of the spear. Right now we're coddling them the first 100,000. That's our infantry, our Cav Scouts, our combat engineers. And they're going to get that type of rifle right off the shelf. And we're going to look at not only a new carbine, we're pretty happy with our sniper rifle that we have right now, but we're going to look at a next generation squad weapon. But Marine Corps is going ahead with theirs, and we've got some other things. But the other problem that we're also looking at is it goes back to the issue I talked about, fitness. You can see pictures. The infantry soldiers, probably not biggest problem in fighting a war, and it's been throughout history, is called weight. So we're looking really at technology that gives it lethality at a smaller weight, because every weight is pain on the muscle joints. And believe me, my VA doctor can tell me all about how over 30 years I didn't take care of myself, but it wasn't going to change a bit. So there's caseless ammo out there, and there's fire direction systems that are easily developed that are on the marketplace that it can allow hesitation squeeze. For those of you who like guns in here, I'm sorry, I'm getting off. But to allow somebody newly be able to see a target, sense a target, and because it's breathing, he may come off, but once it comes back on, the round will go off. So there's that type of technology that's already there, and it's there for all of our weapon systems, but we just got to take advantage of it and fight the acquisition process that's been stonewalling us.
So I apologize for stepping up and asking yet another question. But in a lot of ways, I feel like the general American public is in many ways insulated from the current conflict. When we think about World War II and that generation and the Korean conflict and Vietnam, we think about so many families that were interconnected and very vested in what was happening overseas. One, because somebody in their family or in their neighborhood was directly involved and they knew what was going on. Right now, you hardly ever hear about what's going on over there. And I think about the generation 60, 70 years ago where they were, selling war bonds and getting the American public involved and investing into the future. Like, we are missing that contribution. We are in a military right now where we are doing this. What can I get? Let me get my graduate education voucher, my tuition assistance. What can the Navy, Army, Marine Corps, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry if I missed Coast Guard now. I'm sorry. What I'm saying is, where is that you talk about recruiting, like doing something much bigger than yourself. Selling the country. The country is what we serve, and the nation that we serve, the Constitution, I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, it's the belief in something much bigger than ourselves. If we're looking for a paycheck, that's not what's going to be the next generation that steps up to the plate. We have to make sure that the next generation understands what our nation believes in and supports, and why we go serve in other countries that we don't even know the people there. I mean, that's the piece that makes America different. Is because we serve others. All right, that's where I think we're missing the boat in a lot of ways.
Well, I think you're talking to two people who actually believe at the age of 18 everyone should serve in some way a year of service. It doesn't have to be it has to give to this nation. So you're talking to two people who feel that you're so young at the age of 18, at least go and learn what it is to serve something that's a purpose bigger than yourself. But I will tell you, it's not a good news story for our country. I just spent the last 2 weeks in Panama City, Florida, and Mexico Beach, wiped out. The city does not exist. This is not far from here. All right? Kids can't go to school. Parents can't go to work. The only people working are those that are in the utility business, electric power for the most part, and the city government. Where is the call to action? And there are folks still suffering from the hurricane that hit the Carolinas. I mean, we're not even doing our own internal call to action right here in our own country. So it is frustrating to go down there, and I've been trying to bring my voice back to say, what are we going to do just for cities like Panama City, Florida, that has to be completely rebuilt. I hadn't seen anything like that since I had been in Iraq. It was that devastating. So I know people here have experienced that with the hurricanes that have come through here with Harvey and then what we had in Katrina. But for me, that was being there right after it happened was pretty devastating. And then it's not even a heartbeat in our news of what they're going through. So I agree. It's going to have to come from our citizens to say, this is something that we believe as Americans, that everyone should have service to the nation and do a year of service in any way, shape, or form.
Israel has it.
Israel has it, yes they do. Absolutely.
How about a hand for our two generals? Their dad was one of my best friends. We have today some presents for them as an award for their speaking today. We have, for each of them, a photo of West Point taken by Colonel Bill MacArthur from the space station. It's a picture of West Point, 250 miles up in the air, taken from by our West Point astronaut, Colonel Bill MacArthur, and we're so proud of them and their family. Just an amazing, amazing team. And they're going to stick around afterwards, get a little bite to eat. If some of you have other questions, please come up and ask them. And Dorothy Beeler, please come up. Mrs. Jones wants to meet you especially. Dorothy is amazing, and as are so many of you. Thank you for coming today. It's an honor to have you all here. Thank you very much for being here.